The text came at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday while I was 3 time zones away in Portland, closing the biggest deal of my career. I was sitting in my hotel room, celebrating with room service champagne and reviewing contracts for a $78 million commercial property acquisition, when my phone buzzed with a message that made my blood run cold. Andrea, we sold your apartment while you're away. The buyers want to move in Monday, so you need to move out by Sunday. Dad and I already packed your things. Everything's in storage. Sorry for the short notice, but the offer was too good to pass up. Mom. I stared at the screen for a full minute, reading it again and again, trying to process what I was seeing. My parents had sold my apartment. Without telling me. While I was out of town on business. And they expected me to just accept it. I called Mom immediately. Oh, Andrea honey, I'm so glad you called. Did you get my message? Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? Language, sweetheart. We're just being practical. That apartment was way too expensive for someone your age, and when the Hendersons made such a generous offer, we couldn't turn it down. The Hendersons? Our neighbors from when you were little. They have a daughter starting college next year and they wanted a nice place for her. They offered $340,000, which is almost $60,000 more than you paid for it. I felt a headache building behind my eyes. Mom, you can't sell my apartment. Of course we can, dear. We co-signed the mortgage, remember? We're on the deed. Legally, we have every right to make decisions about the property. That was true technically. When I'd bought the apartment 3 years ago, I'd been in between major deals and my liquid assets were tied up in other investments. My parents had offered to co-sign, and in a moment of weakness, or stupidity, I'd accepted their help. Mom, you forgot to check something. What do you mean? I was already pulling up property records on my laptop, scrolling through the documents that would change everything. The building deed. I've owned this entire complex for 2 years. There was a long pause. That's impossible, Andrea. The building is owned by some investment company. Meridian. Something. Meridian Property Holdings. That's my company, Mom. Another pause, longer this time. Your company? My company. I bought this building and 17 others like it. Your friends the Hendersons? They're my tenants. And as of tomorrow morning, they're going to get eviction notices for attempting to purchase property through fraudulent means. Andrea, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you just tried to sell an apartment in a building I own to people who are already renting from me. I'm talking about the fact that you committed real estate fraud without even realizing it. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. I could hear Dad in the background asking what was wrong. Put me on speaker, I said. Richard, Andrea's on the phone. She says she owns our building. She says what? Dad's voice came through clearly now. Andrea, what's this nonsense about owning the building? It's not nonsense, Dad. I've owned the Riverside Gardens complex for 2 years. All 84 units, including the one you just illegally sold. That's impossible. You work in marketing or something. You don't have that kind of money. I almost laughed. Marketing. After 3 years of building a commercial real estate empire worth $340 million, they thought I worked in marketing. Dad, I need you to listen very carefully. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a certified letter from Meridian Property Holdings. It's going to inform you that your attempted sale of Unit 7B constitutes a breach of your lease agreement and grounds for immediate eviction. Our lease agreement? Andrea, we don't rent from you. We co-own that apartment. No, Dad. You co-signed a mortgage on an apartment in a building that I subsequently purchased. The mortgage was paid off as part of the acquisition. You've been living there as my tenants for 2 years. But we've been paying the mortgage. You've been paying rent. The checks you write to Riverside Mortgage Services go to a property management company that works for me. I set it up that way so you wouldn't feel like you were taking charity. The truth was more complicated than that, but it was close enough. When I'd bought the Riverside Gardens complex, I'd inherited all the existing leases and mortgages. Rather than disrupt my parents' living situation, I'd simply restructured their payments as rent while letting them think they were still paying down a mortgage. It had seemed like a kindness at the time. Andrea, Mom's voice was shaking now. If you own our building, why didn't you tell us? When would I have told you? When you asked about my job and I said commercial real estate and you nodded and changed the subject. When Dad made jokes about me playing with property like it was some kind of hobby. When you assumed I was barely getting by because I drive a 5-year-old car and shop at Target. We never assumed. Mom, You literally just sold my apartment because you thought I couldn't afford it." I could hear them whispering to each other, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. "Even if this is true," Dad said finally, "you can't evict us. We're your parents. Watch me." I hung up and immediately called my property manager. "Meridian Property Holdings, this is Marcus." "Marcus, it's Andrea. I need you to prepare eviction notices for Unit 7B at Riverside Gardens." "The Castro unit? But they're one of our most reliable tenants. They've never missed a payment. They attempted to sell the unit to another party without authorization. They also packed up and removed the belongings of another resident without permission." Jesus. "Okay, I'll have the notices prepared first thing in the morning." "What's the timeline?" "Standard 30-day notice. But I also want you to send a cease and desist letter to the Hendersons in Unit 3A. They attempted to purchase property they're already renting from us." "This sounds complicated." "It's about to get more complicated. I'm flying back tomorrow. Set up a meeting with our legal team for Monday morning." After I hung up, I sat in my hotel room staring out at the Portland skyline, trying to process what had just happened. My parents had sold my apartment while I was away on business, without asking, because they thought I couldn't afford it. The irony was staggering. While they were worried about my financial stability, I was closing deals that would add another $78 million to my portfolio. While they were packing up my belongings like I was being evicted, I was the landlord who could actually evict them. But the deeper irony was that I'd been trying to take care of them for years, and they'd never even noticed. My real estate career had started almost by accident. I'd been working as a marketing coordinator for a commercial development firm when I noticed that several properties in transitioning neighborhoods were being systematically undervalued by sellers who didn't understand the gentrification patterns. I started buying small apartment buildings with investors' money, fixing them up and either flipping them or holding them as rentals. The returns were extraordinary. Within 2 years, I had enough capital to start buying larger properties without outside investors. Within 4 years, I owned 23 buildings across 3 cities and was managing over $300 million in assets. But I kept a low profile. In commercial real estate, success makes you a target for lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, and family members who suddenly need financial help. So I drove an ordinary car, lived modestly, and let most people, including my parents, assume I was just getting by. The problem was that my attempts to help them subtly had backfired. When I'd restructured their mortgage payments as rent, I'd made them lower to help with their budget. When Dad had needed surgery 2 years ago, I'd arranged for their insurance to cover more than it actually did. When Mom's car broke down, I'd had my mechanic fix it and bill it to a fictional warranty program. I'd thought I was being generous and discreet. Instead, I'd reinforced their belief that I was struggling financially and needed their protection. Which brought us to them selling my apartment to help me out of what they perceived as a bad financial situation. I flew back the next morning and went straight to the Riverside Gardens complex. It was a beautiful property, 84 units in 6 buildings, built in the 1920s and renovated to preserve the original character while adding modern amenities. I'd bought it because it was undervalued and had potential, but I'd grown to love it because it felt like a real community. My parents were waiting in the lobby when I arrived, along with the Hendersons and what appeared to be their daughter, Andrea. Mom rushed over like she was greeting a returning war hero. "Honey, we need to straighten this whole thing out." "Hello, Mom." Dad stepped forward, his jaw set in that stubborn way I remembered from childhood arguments. "Andrea, we've been thinking about what you said last night and it doesn't add up. If you really owned this building, we would have noticed." "Would you?" "How?" "Well, for one thing, we would have gotten rent increases. Property taxes in this area have gone up significantly. I absorbed the increases rather than pass them on to tenants. And we would have seen construction notices when you did renovations. I scheduled major work during the day when most residents were at work, and I always provided advance notice through the management company." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "Andrea, dear, I think there's been some confusion. Your parents offered to sell us your apartment and we made a good faith offer. We're not trying to cause any trouble." "Mrs. Henderson, how long have you been living in Unit 3A? "About 18 months. "And who do you write your rent checks to?" "Riverside Property Management." "And who do you think owns this building?" She looked uncertain. "Some investment company, I assume." I pulled out my phone and showed her the property management app. "Mrs. Henderson, This is the owner portal for Riverside Gardens. It shows all 84 units, current rent rolls, maintenance requests and tenant information. Would you like to see your lease agreement? She stared at the screen, her face growing pale. You really own this building? I own this building and 22 others like it. Dad scoffed. That's impossible. Do you have any idea how much a building like this costs? $8.2 million. I bought it in March of 2022 for $8.2 million, financed with $3.1 million cash and a $5.1 million commercial mortgage at 4.2% interest. The specificity of the numbers seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Where did you get $3.1 million in cash? From selling my previous properties and from the profits on my other buildings. What other buildings? I sighed. This was the conversation I'd been avoiding for years. Dad, I own 847 apartment units across Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. My portfolio is currently valued at approximately $340 million, with about $127 million in equity after mortgages. The lobby went completely silent. $340 million? Mom whispered. That's the current market valuation, yes. But you work in marketing. I work in commercial real estate acquisition and management. I've never worked in marketing. But when we ask about your job, you always say something vague about properties and marketing. I say I work in commercial real estate. You hear what you want to hear. Dad sat down heavily in one of the lobby chairs. Andrea, if you have that kind of money, why do you live like what? Like you're struggling. The old car, the discount clothes, eating at cheap restaurants. Because I'm building something, Dad. Every dollar I don't spend on unnecessary luxuries is a dollar I can invest in the next property. Do you know what the difference is between looking wealthy and being wealthy? They stared at me. Looking wealthy costs money. Being wealthy makes money. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat awkwardly. Andrea, I think we should go. This seems like a family matter. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, this involves you too. You attempted to purchase an apartment from people who don't own it, in a building where you're already a tenant. That's going to require some paperwork to sort out. She looked stricken. Are we in trouble? Not trouble exactly. But the sale can't go through, obviously. And there will need to be an investigation into how this happened to make sure it doesn't happen again. After the Hendersons left, I sat with my parents in the lobby of my building, trying to figure out how we'd gotten so disconnected from each other's realities. Andrea, Mom said finally, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest. Okay. When you bought this building, did you know we were living here? Yes. Did you buy it because we were living here? That was a harder question. Partly. It was a good investment regardless, but knowing you were here made it more appealing. And our mortgage payments? Became rent payments. I set them lower than what you were paying before. The insurance coverage for Dad's surgery? I covered the difference. Mom's car warranty? My mechanic, my bill. She was quiet for a long time, processing the implications. You've been taking care of us for years and we never knew. I tried to do it subtly. Too subtly, Dad said. We thought you were the one who needed help. I know. So when we saw an opportunity to help you by selling the apartment at a profit, you were trying to rescue me from a financial situation that didn't exist. And instead we almost sabotaged your business. Not almost. You did sabotage it. I now have to deal with a fraudulent sale attempt, potential legal issues with the Hendersons, and a property management crisis that could have been avoided if you just asked me before taking action. Dad winced. What happens now? It was a good question. I could evict them, which would be legally straightforward but emotionally devastating. I could pretend nothing had happened, which would solve nothing and guarantee future problems. Or I could try to build something new from this mess. Now we figure out how to have an honest relationship. No more assumptions, no more trying to help each other without communicating, no more pretending we understand each other's lives when we clearly don't. What does that look like practically? Mom asked. It means you pay market rate rent like every other tenant. It means when you want to make changes to the apartment, you go through the proper channels like everyone else. And it means when you have concerns about my life or my finances, you ask me directly instead of taking action based on assumptions. And in return, I'll stop trying to help you secretly. If you need financial assistance, we'll discuss it openly. If you need advice, I'll give it honestly. If you need help understanding what I do for work, I'll explain it clearly. Over the following weeks, we did exactly that. Mom and Dad moved to a different unit in the building. Not because I made them, but because they said they needed a fresh start in a space that felt like theirs rather than mine. They started paying market rate rent, which was actually higher than what they'd been paying, but Dad said it was important to him that he contribute fairly to the property he lived in. I started including them in more of my business decisions, not because I needed their input, but because I wanted them to understand what I'd built and why it mattered to me. Dad was particularly fascinated by the financing structures, and Mom enjoyed hearing about the renovation projects and community building initiatives. The Hendersons moved out at the end of their lease, which was probably for the best. The whole situation had been too awkward for everyone involved. 6 months later, at my birthday dinner, held in the community room of the Riverside Gardens complex, Dad raised his glass for a toast. To Andrea, who taught us that the most expensive mistake you can make is assuming you understand someone's life without bothering to ask about it. And to family, Mom added, who forgive each other for being human and help each other become better. I raised my own glass. To honest conversations and second chances. As we clinked glasses, I looked around the room, at the building I owned, at the parents who finally understood what I'd accomplished, at the life I'd built through careful planning and strategic thinking. For the first time in years, everything felt like it was exactly where it belonged. Including me.